Shalom Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nile Shalom Malachei HaShalom Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seidhem l'shalom Malachei HaShalom Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Tonight is a very, very special Shabbat as we welcome our community together to celebrate the founders of Beit Haverim, or then known as the Jewish Fellowship of Davis. What could be more beautiful than looking out and seeing not only a sense of history, but also the sense of the future, and seeing the young and the venerable, those who've laid the foundation of the congregation and those who represent those who will inherit the future and make it live. Sukkot is the Jewish Thanksgiving, and tonight we celebrate with great thanks and a sense of deep gratitude all those who've made our synagogue, Beit Haverim, possible. Without the founding generation beginning even before 1961, continuing up through 1972, when our first building was established, the seeds and the roots of this community took firm hold, and it's because of the dedication, the commitment, the vision and passion and great love that the early families had for this community and for one another that we are able to be here tonight, and we are the inheritors of their great legacy. Judaism has a great tradition of celebrating the ancestors, and we also always talk about Abraham and Sarah, and Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And so we have our own Abrahams and Sarahs, who are our founding ancestors, who we turn to for guidance and inspiration, and so much more, because so many of those families are still a vital, vital part of our community and continue to inspire us with their vision and hopes for the future. Tonight we remember the source of our congregation, those families that gave us our starts. And as I call your name, I would like to invite you to join us up here on the bima to help us light the candles tonight. And so Sonny and Jerry Adler, Hannah and Ernie Biberstein, Oscar and Shula Blumenthal, Tom and Barbara Frankel, Marvin and Joyce Goldman, Alex and Marilyn Groth, Elliot and Susan Goldstein, Charlene Kunitz, Winifred Madison, Janet and Stanley Mizell, Neil Ottinger, Larry and Norma Rappaport, Sandy Redenbach, Gail and Stephen Sosnick, Hannah and Sherman Stein, Joan Sublett, Ann and Stuart Teal, Merrill Rappaport, and the Rabins, and did I miss you? And Emmanuel and Peggy Epstein, Al and Sandy Sokolow. And did I miss anybody? Don't be shy. Come on up here. We're going to get everybody up here. Nicely done. So you haven't lost your touch. Each of you represents a wonderful light in the life of this congregation, and that your light continues to shine for us. Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu hadlik ner shel Shabbat v'shel Yom Tov. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat v'yom tov. We're going to join together in a special Shehechianu, not only because it's Sukkot, but also for this wonderful opportunity that God has allowed us to rejoice with all of you tonight.
Shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh
to continue to bless all of you as you have been a blessing for so many of us. So thank you. Mazal Tov. This is a wonderful milestone for all of us. Some of us have only been here for maybe 11, starting 12 years. You may think that the synagogue has always been like this, the way that it is today. But we've invited a few members who are in on the ground floor to share their memories of the early days of the congregation and this community, even before it was a congregation. And so to start tonight, we'd like to invite Hannah and Ernie Biberstein to share with us their reflections. Ernie, speaking on behalf of the Biberstein. Why don't you come over to this microphone over here?
Deputized. In the spirit of Yad B'Yad, which we understand is intended to encourage acceptance and tolerance of divergent opinions and practices within the community, we thought it might be entertaining, if not instructive, to recall the clash of a couple of such divergencies in the earlier history of the congregation and how they played out and were eventually resolved. The earliest instance we recall concerned the organization of our sporadic Friday evening services. One of the key figures involved raised the question whether it was permissible for people who had not attended the worship service to partake of the subsequent oneg. I'm not making that up, you know. His opinion was that such would be an affront and insult to the faithful, if not to God, and should under no circumstances be allowed. This provoked an impassioned and heated debate between advocates of freedom of choice versus reverence for the integral sanctity of the event. It went on for some considerable period of time. Finally, since I suppose no one wanted to come down on the wrong side of piety, this all or nothing principle was indeed adopted. The results, despite the fact that people, as usual, dribbled in throughout the service, some just as the last overtones of Adon Olam died away. I don't recall anyone ever being refused admittance, no member, I guess, being either physically or mentally prepared to act as a bouncer or sergeant at arms. The second example was a bit dicier. We were in the Oak Avenue building by then, and some of us attempted to hold regular Shabbat morning services, but the achievement of a minyan was a constant problem. Luckily, it seemed, there were a bunch of young students around eager to attend. The flip side, They were ardently orthodox and opposed to gender equality by then official congregational policy. A minyan was still an iffy business, so when one of them davened, women were ignored, and there often was no minyan by their count. When I davened, I counted the women, possibly gaining a minyan and proceeding accordingly. When that happened, at the critical passages, the kids, we called them the frummies, walked out, and we had no minyan by anybody's count. Moreover, they attempted to segregate the women and even erect a mechitza, to which we strenuously objected. When the controversy became more generally known, one congregational member stated formally that the gender bias violated congregational policy and could under no circumstances be tolerated, even if she never set foot in the synagogue on Shabbat. The matter raised threats and even instances of defection from the congregation and became a prominent agenda item before the board. Remedial suggestions ranged from locking up the synagogue on Shabbat to letting the frummies have their way, with several very convoluted schemes in between. As I recall, no Solomonic settlement was ever arrived at, and after muddling along without a reliable minyan definition or a mechitza, the issue evaporated when the school year ended and many of the frummies departed, most of them permanently. We do believe that these controversies and their course are not atypical. For one thing, they illustrate the ludicrous aspect almost all such controversies share, even the global bloodletting ones. Secondly, the way they were resolved was hardly related to any deliberate human effort. Finally, if anyone had backed off at the very beginning and looked at them with some perspective, their eventual outcome could have been predicted and perhaps embraced without all the wasted effort and agony. So what can we tell you? Controversies come and controversies go, and congregations survive and sometimes even flourish.
We now would like to invite Jerry Adler forward to share with us memories already you've been alluded to, Jerry, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts this evening. Shabbat shalom.
The hopes of those who we've heard about from the 50s were formalized on November 27, 1961. This is the corporate seal of the Jewish Fellowship of Davis, incorporated that day. With that incorporation, Marvin's job as treasurer and everybody else's job who was trying to raise money through the building fund became somewhat easier, because then came the 501c3 recognition and money was coming in. The money came in so well that there was actually an interest in a piece of land out where the Unitarian Church is now, and that piece of land became security for the building that that Marilyn dedicated in 1972. I had become president in the year before and had the pleasure or the temerity or the guts, whatever, to sign the mortgage for that building, which was about, my memory is about $85,000, and we had about 25 family members, if I recall. You can look in the booklet tonight and you see Marilyn's recognition from her records, I'm sure, of what the dues were then, $30 a year and so on. We were betting on the come. We did have the benefit of a lot of work by Marvin, Ed Rabin, Tom Frankel, Al Sokolow, and others. The ark behind me on our eastern wall I remember first in the Sokolo's garage, and having been there for some years from San Francisco, and that was the kind of vision that was going on at that time. The betting on the come was assisted by Ed Rabin's expertise in matters of property law, Tom Frankel, his legal expertise, and his contacts with the folks next door, which at various times was first a church, then a school, and we after identifying the land that we wanted, we had to then convince the city of Davis that we could cut a deal. It was a church at that time, wasn't it, Tom? It was a church. That we could cut a deal for shared parking, because if you remember, that Oak Avenue building had, 7 or 8 parking spaces, and so we told them, we're going to not be there Sunday morning. Well, soon we were there Sunday mornings, but we got that through the Planning Commission. I stepped down. Then I argued as president, I think, of the Jewish Fellowship for this variance or whatever we were doing, conditional use permits, so we had the parking. That year was an interesting year as the building was being built. We had a Jewish contractor, Al Passavoy. We had a Jewish architect, Bud Goldberg, and of course we had all these Jews on the board, and we put the plans together for the building, and we didn't put the ark on the right wall. And we didn't realize that, until sometime when it was too late. And the periscope that you may remember over there, the periscope design was a favorite of Bud Goldberg, and he built all of his buildings with his periscope. And the periscope was great, but it leaked. And leaking down onto the ark was not a good thing. We developed other leaks later on. The year was interesting. In that year, we had as the first death of the organized congregation. Stu Rifkin, who was Jerry Rifkin, still a member of this congregation. Rich, the son, writes for the Enterprise. Stu died coming off the golf course, and we didn't know what to do. We didn't have a Jewish spot in the cemetery. There was nothing dedicated. With the help of Rabbi Ehrenkrantz of Mosaic Law, we wound up dedicating the spot after we convinced the board of the cemetery, well, the Catholics have their space. Why shouldn't we have ours? And I don't know whether they were expecting some kind of a lawsuit or whatever, but we got our dedicated space, and we put the faucet in and all of that, and Stu was buried there. This bema was a gift from Don Anderson, then owner of what was Davis Lumber and Hardware, now Ace Lumber and Hardware, in memory of Stu. The other thing that we were doing, we recognized that the campus was growing, gave us a little bit more confidence in what we were doing. The law school had opened in '66. We figured we'd get some Jews out of that. They got me out of that. The medical school opened in 1968. Elliot and Susan came. I know they're here somewhere, or were here. So we figured we'd get some Jewish doctors out of that. So, and we also had the view that if we built it, they will come. Somebody did a story about that with the ballpark some years later on. When I left the presidency before Marilyn's ascension, I received this very nice scroll, which I don't keep well enough. And it says some very nice things, but one of the things that it said really gave me concern until we got into this building, because the last whereas, if anything goes wrong, we know where to place the blame. So I'm glad we're here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now we'd like to hear from Joyce and Marvin Goldman, share with us their memories.
Well, first I'd like to say that when we arrived in 1958 It was for a 5-year plan. And now it's 46 years later, and oh my, this is a wonderful occasion. I have 2 stories to tell. And the first one is, it concerns Al Sokolow, and I don't see
He's
where
over here
you are. Where's that? Oh, there he is, okay. Cowering. I had been an elementary school teacher prior to coming to Davis, and Al found out about that, and one day he calls me up and he says, "I'm volunteering you to be a Sunday school teacher." And I said, "Wait a minute, I don't have any experience with Sunday school. I've never gone to Sunday school. I haven't been confirmed, I haven't had a bat mitzvah." He says, "Don't worry, we'll work it out." And so he did. And pretty soon after that, I became the Sunday school chairperson, director, and then I was on the school board. So Al, I don't know whether to thank you or not, but it was fun. My other memory concerns my father and my stepmother, Sam and Bertie Weiss, who knew that we did not have a Torah in those days, and they heard about a congregation that was disbanded in Philadelphia. And my father arranged to get the Torah, took it with him on an airplane, and he bought a seat for the Torah and brought it to the congregation. And so it was a very poignant time for me to remember that. And incidentally, we have new Torahs now. The old one is stored someplace in the building, I think, isn't it?
I think it's the one in the back.
It's in the back. But the Torah cover was donated by us to the Judah Magnus Museum. And it was coincidental that my son, Rob, who was helping the curator at the Judah Magnus one year, helped to install that Torah cover as part of their permanent exhibit. So that's very nice to have as a memory.
Thanks, Joyce.
Well, when we arrived here in the end of November 1958, having left the tundra and ice floes of Rochester, New York, with our new son, who was about 6 weeks old, it took Joyce another 6 weeks to stop crying because Davis had all of 6,000 people, and I wrote back to my relatives in the East, I was on the only campus on the planet that had more acres than students. It was really something. Anyhow, I got on campus, and I was setting up my radiological laboratory, and one day I come in, and there's a note that says, "I borrowed your equipment." I said, "Who the heck would have such chutzpah to come in and borrow my equipment?" It was signed by Gunter Zweig. Well, Gunter Zweig did indeed have the chutzpah to do that, and Gunter Zweig happened to have been my biochemistry lab instructor when I was at the University of Maryland working on my master's. So we got together, had a nice reunion, and he said, "You know, a few of us Jews in town," and there were only a few, "are getting together at the Girl Scout cabin, and we're going to have a Hanukkah party." And Norma's going to tell you more about that. And I went there, and that, I think, was the first formal event, if we want to put it, that began what was then the Jewish Fellowship and now is our congregation. So that was quite an event. About 1960 or 61, one of our early family members, Jules and Florence Kirshner, had a son, Sam, who was going to be bar mitzvah. And I think Ernie tutored him, 61, to do this. And we held it in the Kirshner's backyard. And it was a grand thing, all decorated. And all these Jews came. About half of them spoke only Hebrew because they were, most of the Israeli agriculture industry was born from graduate students who came here and learned about dry land agriculture. And every single institute, I think, in Israel today is run by someone who's come through our mill. In any event, we went and had this wonderful event, and under Ernie's excellent tutelage, it went beautifully. And we were all so great and happy about that one of the people there says, "Boy, this is so wonderful. You know, if we ever had a place, you know, I would give $100 to the building fund." And so I cropped up and said, "Good, we just started a building fund," and that's how it started. And we had maybe 30 or 40 families, and we went around collecting money. And I remember I was the treasurer of the building fund, which consisted of 2 pieces of pre-Excel spreadsheets in which everyone's name and amounts are on there. And those were our books that we got together until about 1971 or 2 when we got some land and started building. And the coda on this little story is, I'm still waiting for the $100 from that guy who said he'd get it done. So that was something, and you all know who I'm talking about. But it was I know. Well, in that case, he's excused, but he did symbolically catalyze the whole event. So we were pleased to be there in the beginning, and I was so pleased when we got the thing built and people stopped crossing the street when they saw me coming down because I'd be with my famous outstretched palm. But now we've passed that on to others. But those are the good old days, and they're only getting better. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, Marilyn, here you're opening the same ark right here. You should get your picture up there with the ark.
I never knew I'd get to be a cover girl. What do I remember? Well, some of what I remember. How many people who were up here before were actually at the dedication of the building? Could you raise your hands?
In 72.
In 72. So there's quite a few of you. Okay. Well, you might remember some of this too. I remember that about 34 years ago, and about 34 pounds ago, I stood at this bima, nervous as I am today, and extolled the enormous achievement of our small community. I remember naming those who had assisted in nourishing the notion of building a multi-purpose facility, which would enable the Jews of Davis to have a home, a school, a shul, a physical presence in town. I remember how hard it was to reach that moment. Nobody knew the concept of build it and they will come back then. Not even all the members thought we could or should undertake this folly. I remember how my predecessor, Jerry, had guided this band of disparate and sometimes desperate co-religionists to the point where we could entertain the thoughts of permanence, looking forward to that day when we could finally retire the infamous Shulmobile. I remember saying at a board meeting, you know, the day could come when this building could be in use every day or night of the week. And I remember they all laughed at me. It's true. I remember many things about the process that brought us to that day. Our project was a reality. The details and struggles that bonded those who were here at the time instilled a collective pride of ownership and achievement, but that's no surprise, is it? I remember how we planned the dedication of our Oak Avenue structure for Labor Day of 1972. We were limited to a capacity of 200 according to the fire regulations. There was a competition for those 200 seats, and I think those chairs were donated by Joyce's father, by the way. Whom should we invite as our first honored guests? The builder, the architect, the carpet man, the press, the mayor, the representatives of other faiths, some of those Sacramentans who thought the causeway only went in one direction. How to be selective without hurt feelings. I remember how on that fateful day, Labor Day, Monday, September 4th, 1972, we all assembled for the program. It was a gorgeous day. We attached the mezuzah. There were shofar blasts from opposite corners of the room, of the building, to herald the momentous event. The Torahs were removed from the portable ark and handed to the elders, those 40-year-olds of our community. Everyone joined the procession by marching outside, winding all around the building and back in through the front doors, bringing the Holy Scrolls to their rightful home, this Aaron Kodesh behind me, and the Ner Tamid was lit for the first time. Ernie, I think, did that. The chosen 200 members and honored guests took their seats once again, and then we listened to the rest of the readings and speeches and thought about how happy and clever we were. We sang and we danced to Israeli music, we laughed, and of course we ate. It was an exhausting day. But here's my more compelling memory of that time, or as they would say, the rest of the story. A few hours later, after having fallen asleep in my clothes, my husband awoke me with the most horrific news. While we were dancing and singing in a time zone that was 9 hours later, all the Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics had been murdered. Our joy in Davis was short-lived. Not even 24 hours had passed. I remember that as a flurry of phone calls notified members about a gathering that night, Tuesday the 5th, to talk about what we would do as a community, there was no question about where to meet. Everyone knew for the first time that there was a place for Jews in Davis to go when there was trouble. I remember that we gathered, we discussed, we argued what to do, how to do it, we planned. We had no guidance. We only had each other to console over this calamity. We devised a service. Again, the next night, Wednesday, September 6th, the room was filled to capacity. Jews and non-Jews of Davis did not wait to be invited this time. I remember to this day Ed Rabin's talk at that service and his prophetic words. What happens first to the Jews will later happen to the world. Little did we know that this was only the beginning for the Jews and the world of many horrendous calamities. The service was the start of a 24-hour vigil, at the conclusion of which we repeated the Kaddish. That was Thursday, September 7th. And I also remember that the next evening, Friday the 8th, was not only Shabbat, it was also Erev Rosh Hashanah. So when I remember that first week in that building, the week that was, we did use that facility almost every day. I remember that the timing was ironic and impeccable. That from this time forward, the Jews of Yolo County would always have a physical presence and a place to go in times of joy and in times of trouble. And today we are the beneficiaries of that legacy. Just want to thank the Renkins in advance. Congratulations, and wish you all Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
And now we turn to Larry and Norma Rappaport, batting cleanup tonight.
I started thinking about this Rosh Hashanah, and I was overwhelmed when I walked from the parking lot to the sanctuary and seeing this huge crowd of people, us, and the orchestra, the combined orchestra of older people, kids, the rabbi up in front ready to give his talk, the thought of going in and eventually coming out, the thought of apple slices and honey and on honey cake. And it made me think about how different it was from the time we arrived here in January 1956. And I'll tell you that the only thing we had in common with what we saw this year in 1956 was that we had honey cake and we had apples and honey. That was it. Davis was a very different place. There were 6,000 residents, there were 3,000 university students. There was no Mondavi. There was, where Freeborn Hall sits today, something called Rec Hall. Rec Hall was a barn. Rec Hall had drapes, burlap sacks that hung from the ceilings, from the rafters. And these were intended to soften the sound of the single piano player who would come maybe once every 6 months. And everybody would go to hear him, because if you didn't, he might not come back. there were very few Jewish families here. We knew some of them, and certainly had met the Steins, and were befriended and were friendly with them. And but where we began to meet friends was at holiday parties with a lot of Israelis who haven't really been mentioned and should be, because there were many of them here, and they were very much part of the community, certainly for events like Hanukkah and Purim, where people would get together, and it was said before, but at the Girl Scout cabin or the Boy Scout cabin, we no longer have the Girl Scout cabin. And you met friends. We had parties. We had dancing. We had singing. We actually, when we built our house in 1959, we actually made what we considered a large living room. It isn't today, but then it was a fair-sized living room. And one reason was so that we could maybe get together once in a while with everybody in the same place, because there just weren't that many spaces in our homes at the time. Ernie alluded to the fact that there were some problems in the congregation. We had very few Jews with a lot of religious persuasions, ranging from very committed. We had a wonderful man from Israel whose name was Joe Kalb, who was an Orthodox Jew and taught Talmud to those who were interested in it. But we had such diverse opinions that even into the 70s, we still couldn't decide how to affiliate. Eventually, stole a leaf from the Unitarians and named ourselves the Jewish Fellowship of Davis. Thinking about honey cake and apple slices got me really hungry.
Yeah.
So I began to think about food. And the thought of food led to some discussion about what Jewish food was like. Now, we had at the time a few markets. We had Stan's Butcher Shop on G Street, decidedly non-kosher. We had the State Market, which was run by some nice Chinese people, and also decidedly not kosher. So when you wanted to find Jewish food, you had to think back to the good old days of how it was. One day, Norma and I went into the State Market and we're looking for sour cream. I don't know any families that don't know about sour cream. We went to the shelves, looked around, couldn't find it, and asked the clerk whether sour cream was available. And she puffed up. She said, "We have only fresh cream here. We don't serve sour cream." I had a similar problem with bagels. Now, Ernie, you were almost right. We had tremendous dissension on certain issues, but on the question of bagels, there was no war that loomed greater in the congregation. It should be put down as a historical event. Anybody who came from New York, as we did, knew that the best bagels, of course, came from New York, but the same thing was said by people from Chicago and from every other place they came from. But I'll tell you, by the time we got here and spent a few weeks, we decided that any bagel would be good. So we went to the State Market. By the way, State Market had there was a second State Market, and that's right near where the hopefully future Trader Joe's is going to be built, and decidedly Jewish market, of course, and we're very happy to hear about that. That's a joke, friends. So we went back to the State Market and looked for the bagels, and we looked and we looked. Again, we couldn't find it, and found our friendly clerk. And this time when I asked her, "Do you have bagels here?" she looked through me with a very stony look on her face, and you could see that she didn't know what it was. I said, "Think about salty donuts." And no, that didn't work. So I decided, tail between my legs, to retreat and never bring the subject up again. So in fact, what we used to do was go to San Francisco and stock up and come back with some bags of them, but it was just never the same. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to be here. We feel great about our experience, and it seems to only get better.
keep mine short and sweet, and it is sweet. We arrived in January of 1956, and there were very few Jews here, same old, and there were a few Israeli families with whom we soon bonded. Larry being in the School of Agriculture, we quickly became acquainted with Israelis who mostly were here for that reason. And it took a couple of years. Little by little, the connections were made. Somehow or other, we found one another, started celebrating holidays together. And I remember one particular holiday, 1958. Joyce and Marv alluded to it. We were having a Hanukkah party in the then Girl Scout cabin, which no longer exists. The Senior Citizen Center has been built on that site. And it was very joyous, and it was a small cabin, and it seemed very full of people. But across the room, I saw this young couple, roughly our age, very close to our age. And the young woman looked strangely familiar. And so we became acquainted and started comparing notes because we looked familiar to one another, but we really didn't know one another. Well, it turned out that Joyce Goldman and I had sat in the same classes, the same years, all through our college career at Brooklyn College in New York, majoring in the same field, but had never met in New York City. And it took coming to Davis to a Jewish event for our paths to cross and for us to become very close friends, a friendship which has lasted. Joyce, you're wrong on the years. It's 48 years, not 46. My math isn't good, but figure it out. Well, I just want to say that it epitomizes to me that friendship of many, many years that started at a meeting of Jews, epitomizes what this community means to me, and I think I can safely say for Larry as well. It was the beginning of many connections, of great warmth, of important friendships, and some friendships that are peripheral, and yet when we see one another, there's hugging, there's kissing, there's support. People miss you when you go away on a trip. They care about you when you're ill. They're there for you in joy and in sorrow. And this community means so much to us. And I've observed other friends of ours who live in more isolated circumstances, and family members as well, who have aged and don't have the network that we are fortunate enough to have here. And all I can say is we treasure it, and we treasure our beloved Greg, who has brought so much to this community, and we treasure all of you.
We thank all of you for sharing your special memories and bringing alive really what this congregation means, and understanding the context of how it developed and how it grew and how it's touched your lives, I think inspires all of us to think about how we can continue that spirit. And tonight we want to celebrate the spirit of our founders, because it does continue to live beyond you, and there are some who seem as if they were here at the very beginning because they have that same passion and that same commitment and dedication. And so I'd like to call our president, Esther Novak, to present tonight our very first Spirit of the Founders Award.
Listening to the memories of the founders is really awesome, and all of us who came here much later owe an enormous debt to the founders, the builders, the early members of the congregation for building the community, building 2 buildings. I'm struck tonight by how much overlap there is between the people being honored tonight as founders and the people who were honored several weeks ago as volunteers of the congregation, because so many of our founders continue to be such active volunteers and pillars of the congregation. I was struck by the memory of Ernie lighting the Ner Tamid in the first building, and I remember Ernie lighting the Ner Tamid in this building. Among the things that our founders have given to the entire congregation is their spirit, this incredible spirit of supporting the community and being of service to the community, and their dedication to this congregation and the Jewish people as a whole. The congregation is very, very happy this year to begin giving our first Founders Spirit Award. This is an award that will be given from time to time to members who really exemplify the spirit of our founders moving forward. And this year we are very, very happy to give the first Founders Spirit Award to 2 members who really exemplify that spirit enormously. So I'd like to ask Libby and Jean Renkin to please come up to the bima. Libby and Jean certainly need no introduction from me, and I don't think anyone really needs to be told how much they have given this community for over 25 years, whether it's Jean being the backbone of our Shabbat services, Torah reading, Libby and Jean being at just about every Friday night and Shabbat morning service and program and event, and always being of service to the community. I remember being at a meeting many years ago when somebody said, oh, we ought to have a welcoming committee, and someone else said, we don't need that, we have Libby. So it is my very great pleasure to give the first Congregation Beth Haverim Founders Spirit Award to Libby and Jean with our thanks and our love.
I'm going to open. And you'll see this is actually an ancient oil lamp, since you are the spirit of the congregation, and a light and a lamp for the way. It says Founders Spirit Award, Libby and Jean Renkin, in recognition of your many years of exemplary service and dedication, Congregation Beit Haverim, October 6th, 2006. And you have to be careful because it's not attached, like some of us. Yes. But it might, and it comes even with a certificate of authenticity. It's from the Iron Age, the Kingdom of Judea and Israel, sometime between the time of 930 and 586 BCE. Which is long before the congregation was actually built, but we hope. Share. Yes, but we hope that you'll look at that and remember your connection always to the congregation.
Oh, beautiful! Oh.
Did you want to say something?
Jean first.
We're going to speak separately because we want to tell you what being in this congregation means to each of us. We're overwhelmed by this award. For one thing, we know that there are many other people in this community who have contributed very much as we have, to keeping the place going. And we hope in due time they can all have their rewards too. But for the moment, we'll accept this for all of them. I want to thank you all
first of all, for establishing the congregation. We came here when it was first established. We came here when you had your first rabbi, and we were so impressed with the community, with the rabbi, that we decided we would stick along with it. And this experience has reunited me with my Jewish heritage, which I had completely dropped for many years. And it brought me back. It also brought Libby into our community, something that I'm very thankful for. It's just meant a lot to both of us, and I want to thank you all. Not so much for the honor as for being here. And we do what we can, as everyone should.
The founders made this dream happen, and here we are. Have you ever seen such colors of feeling and spirit and heart and our faces all together and what we mean to each other? This tremendous, overwhelming, amazing honor truly belongs to everybody here in our Beit Haverim. We understand each other's sadness, and we share in each other's happiness. Each of you and the friends from years past who are not actually with us tonight, but are here with us in so many other ways, have given us so much. Our lives are changed for the better because of you. Ever since I walked down the path over on Oak Avenue and walked in the door, ever since that moment, I've constantly felt in my heart to say, Shehekianu. And please know that I feel this way with all of you, each one of you. And you know who you are because it's each one of you. And I want to say, please teach me to number my days, that I may gain a heart of wisdom and a sense of humor as we all go on and on and on together. And more than words, just thank you so much.
Well, take your word. Just be careful.
I'll take this in my hand.
Put it back in the box if you want.
Shabbat shalom, y'all.
Kadosh Baruch